evangelicals have been hijacked by the political right. Yeah, our doctrinal statements have been somehow rewritten with hate the poor, leave the disenfranchised out of the country, marginalize anybody who doesn't look like us, and definitely don't love, because that would be weak. I mean, where is any of that written in the Bible?
And it drives me crazy. Shattered pieces like a spider's web, all tangled up in this beautiful mess. But it is what it is.
The Deconstructionist podcast is produced by Nicholas Rowe at the National Audio Preservation Society Recording Studio in Newark, Ohio.
Follow us on social media at www.thedeconstructionist.com, on Facebook at Deconstructionist Podcast, Twitter at DeconstructCast, and Instagram at Deconstructionist Podcast.
If listening to this podcast has benefited you in any way, or if you have connected with it, or it's resonated somewhere with you, consider making a donation. Even the smallest donations go to help John and I maintain healthy relationships with our wives and keeps their blood pressure at a healthy level. The donate link is in the show notes, or you can visit our website and click the donate tab.
Made of blue and red, bleed into one beautiful mess. But it is what it is. It's okay, just like this. No, I don't.
Welcome, everybody, to the Deconstructionists podcast. We're your hosts. I'm Adam Narlock.
And I am John Williamson.
And oh my, just tell them what we got, John.
Oh, man. We got some science for you. This is our first official scientist on the podcast.
No offense to Scientific Michael.
Oh, well, yeah. Yes.
But he knows.
Yeah. This is our first PhD,
career scientist.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. She is a doctor in atmospheric science at the University of Texas Tech, and political science, which is interesting. It's a very interesting combination.
Well, who is it, first of all?
Oh, yeah. I should probably tell people.
This is what happens when you record late. I love it.
Yeah.
It's raw.
People have no idea. We have to work around schedules of not only our families, but the families of the people we have on. And so we're working around kids and bedtimes. And
it's great.
Oh, man.
So, yeah.
So,
and we're excited because
it was a great interview.
Oh, my gosh. So who is this wonderful young lady we just spoke with?
It is Katharine Hayhoe. And she is absolutely brilliant and just has this just sparkling personality that just comes through.
Yes.
And I mean, she's just brilliant. Like I said, she's got over 120 peer-reviewed papers, abstracts, and other publications.
That's a lot. It's a few more than you have, I think, isn't it?
Just a few.
Slightly more than John
has
published.
Let's you count the one time I blogged, no one read it,
and your high school papers don't count.
Oh man! But she's got a book out that she co-wrote with her husband. She's been featured on the Showtime documentary "Years of Living Dangerously," where she was actually interviewed by Don Cheadle.
Hanging with Cheadle.
She was featured on the list of 50 women to watch in Christianity Today, and also featured on Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People a couple years ago.
That's the second person that we've had that's one of Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People.
I know. I'd like to collect all 100, wouldn't you?
Let's get going. Let's make some hay, man. Get on the phone.
I'm gonna take care of that.
Start making some calls.
Yeah.
Man, was that fun, though. She is... I felt, obviously, as people notice when the interview starts to play, I felt right at home because she is a very gregarious, enthusiastic, positive optimist, probably a 7 on that old Enneagram. I felt very at home. But she's climate change. She's all about climate change and everything around that. And I think one of the things that's great about, obviously, we love to have anyone on this podcast that will create some disruption in our worldviews.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. All of these things all go together anyway, so it's very convenient to have labels of just, philosophy, science, theology, religion, blah, 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 blah. they all go together. And this topic in particular, I felt like was this like, it's so obvious they all go together when you're talking about climate change. And the way she talks about it is a perfect topic for the Deconstructionist podcast, because let's get honest, not everybody's on board with this.
Right.
Like who's the one population that is so far from on board, even with the insurmountable evidence toward climate change? Who is it?
Evangelicals.
Evan-freaking-gelicals.
Come on, evangelicals.
Come on, guys.
You can do it.
We believe in you. Man, she's just so gracious, though, in talking about all of this science and knowing just how concrete and practical it is. These aren't, it's one thing when you're talking about astrophysics and you're talking about gravity waves and you're talking about black holes and you're talking about, the Big Bang and you're talking about all these kinds of things. And it's like easy to geek out and, neutrino stars and quarks and, all those kinds of things. It's easy to geek out and have fun. When you start talking about the car you drive, when you start talking about the fuel you burn, when you start talking about your shopping habits and how the fashion industry works and eating red meat and all these really practical things that are tied to some really spectacular science, observable, measurable. Like I love what she says, a thermometer doesn't lie.
Right.
No matter what way you slice it, a thermometer doesn't lie. So what an apt thing for our little show here.
Yeah. I think she brings this really interesting, unique perspective where she's successfully been able to marry the two things together, science and faith. And not only has she been able to do it, but her dad modeled that for her, which I thought was really, really interesting. We went into a little bit of her background.
Yeah.
I think her answer, and I'd heard her say it before about the roles of faith and the role of science. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really poignant moment, and I really like her answer there. I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, people are going to really like that. I think that one thing that surprised me, because I was expecting this almost like this crusader to like reconcile science and religion and all these kinds of things. And what you got was somebody that's like, duh, like, what do you mean? It's easy. She made it look effortless. Like it wasn't even a problem at all.
Yeah.
And we're not talking about somebody who's twisting the scientific facts to fit. She was talking about the Big Bang. She was talking about billions of years. She was talking about, the scientific processes that measure climate change that people want to a lot of times turn a blind eye to, especially if they're in the religious right. The evangelical right. And she did it with this integrity and this honesty where she's doing her best to look at everything while being true to her convictions, her heart and her mind. It's absolutely wonderful. We shouldn't talk anymore. We should just roll tape on this thing, don't you think? Is there anything else?
Man, when we joked about, I think a couple episodes ago about the summer of power women.
Oh my gosh.
We weren't kidding.
We didn't know how not kidding we were.
Yeah. Strap your helmet on. This one's going to be good.
Good gravy, Marie. Oh my gosh. What a blast. So without further ado, we have the first scientist to come on the Deconstructionist podcast, Katharine friggin' Hayhoe.
I
Man.
used to live like I was a prisoner in chains. Confined by my own design, defined by things I could not change.
All right. Well, welcome to the Deconstructionist podcast.
Oh, are you talking to me? Thank you.
Yes. That was the best intro ever.
That was awesome. We don't edit any of this stuff too, so that's going to be really funny.
Yeah.
Right.
That's great.
So one of the questions we like to start off with, just so the people listening can get to know our guests a little bit, are just kind of a little bit about your background. And I think the audience is going to be really interested in kind of your upbringing. I know a little bit about your history, just a tiny bit, and I know that your dad was also both a scientist and a religious man. And obviously that had some influence on your upbringing. So if you could just share with us a little bit about how you were raised, what your household was kind of like, and how that influenced the work that you are involved in now.
Sure. So Science is not always a girl thing, where there's all these programs called, science is a girl thing that people are supposed to be sending their daughters to these days. But I was really fortunate because I grew up in a household where I have 3 sisters. My dad has 6 sisters. And my dad used to joke that the only male in the house was the cat. But my dad loves science. He just loves trying to figure out how things work. And his perspective very much is that when we're studying science, when we're trying to figure out how the world works, how the universe works, we're basically trying to figure out what God was thinking when he put the whole thing together in the first place.
Interesting.
Yeah. It was a great perspective to grow up with, and it was one that really integrated the whole idea of science and faith. I had no idea that people thought science and faith were in opposition and were fighting with each other until, I forget how old I was. I was, way down the road by the time I figured that out, because growing up with my dad, both being a teaching elder in our local church, as well as being a science teacher, I just had the idea that, the Bible's God's written word and nature is God's expressed word, and we can learn about God equally from both of them.
Yeah,
oh, wow.
Great. That's wonderful.
A refreshing perspective, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, I would say nowadays, I would take it even further. I'd say if we really truly believe that God created the world, then why would we think it's going to tell us anything different? Right?
Oh, wow.
Right.
Yes.
So then why the resistance from so many people within, we had a great conversation with a pastor from Minnesota, which isn't too far from Canada, so maybe you know him. Greg Boyd talks about he talks a lot about the anti-intellectualism, specifically in evangelicalism. Do you have any thoughts on why that might be? It sounds like you were a little bit protected from that, but it sounds like you might also have some thoughts on it.
Yes, I definitely do. And it sounds like I should listen to his podcast too. So what we have to realize is that there's a lot of these kind of phenomena that are quite unique to the United States. So even though Minnesota is close to Canada, even though Ohio is close to Canada, there are some really different mindsets north versus south of the border. And that goes for most of the other borders as well. One of the main reasons for that is in the United States over the past few decades, over the past 40, 50 years or so, increasingly Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, has become associated not only with a single political party, but with the right wing of the single political party.
Yeah.
And so there is a lot of anti-intellectualism in public culture in America. A guy won the Pulitzer Prize for writing about it in 1964. So this is nothing new. The idea of, not trusting those pointy-headed, scientists or wonks. But it's gotten integrated into Christian circles because we have increasingly been confusing and confounding our political ideology with our faith.
Interesting. And that's the reason.
Mm-hmm. In a nutshell, yes.
Wow.
So I really want to follow that line of thought, but before we do that, I would like to go back a little bit to your history. So, just out of curiosity, obviously, your father had a great influence on your upbringing, and obviously paved the way for you to see that science and faith are not necessarily at odds with one another.
Right.
So specifically, obviously, you're known for being involved in climate change. In fact, you've won some awards for that. You've got some tons of articles that you've published. What led you into that specific field? Because if I remember correctly, was your undergraduate degree in a different field of science? Is that correct?
Yeah, my undergraduate degree and the first couple of research papers I did were all in astrophysics.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Yeah, which I loved. Don't get me wrong. Yeah, I started off studying variable stars, and then I worked on a research project looking at the way galaxies cluster around quasars.
Oh, wow.
I know.
Whoa.
It was very cool. So that's what I thought I was going to do with my life. Because again, how much more fun is it than to try to figure out why and how God had created these amazing things, on the other side of the universe, and we can observe them from here on Earth, and not only observe them, but we can actually figure out how they work. I mean, that just blows my mind when I think that we can do that.
That blows my mind.
Yeah. I mean, we're just on this little insignificant planet, and we have actually figured out things like how the universe came into being and, how all these galaxies developed. Anyway, so here I was finishing up my undergrad degree at University of Toronto, and the Canadian system is a bit different than the American. You come in to university and you've already got all your prerequisites out of the way, so you immediately start doing whatever it is you want to do. And then by the time you get to the end, when you're in your fourth year, you have a lot of extra time to take extra courses at that point. So I had already taken, children's lit and the Gothic Cathedral and a minor in Spanish. I'd already done all that. And I had another course I needed to take. So I was looking around, and over in the geography department, there's this course on climatology. So, from the arrogance of a physicist, I thought, well, that's got to be an easy course. Why don't I take that?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
And what I didn't realize was that the guy who was teaching the course had just gotten back from the National Center for Atmospheric Research down here in the States. He'd been working with one of the top climate modelers in the world at that time, a guy called Steve Schneider, who just passed away a couple of years ago. And Steve actually became my mentor when I went into climate science. And I took this class, and it completely blew me away for two reasons. I had always known that climate change was real. I mean, I didn't even know until after I moved to the States that there were people who didn't think it was real. So the whole idea that climate change isn't real is very much an American phenomenon. So it wasn't that I didn't think this was real, but I had always kind of said, well, we have deforestation, we have air pollution, we have biodiversity loss, like all of these issues. And so climate change is one of these issues. So I took this class, and I realized that climate change is not just one of these issues. Climate change is affecting every single one of these issues to the point where we're not going to be able to fix any of them. And not just environmental issues, like deforestation or air pollution. We're not going to be able to fix global hunger and disease and water shortages and poverty. We're not going to be able to fix these things if we leave climate change out of the picture, because it's what the Department of Defense here calls a threat multiplier. It's taking all of these issues we already are really worried about, and it's multiplying them. So that was the first thing that surprised me. And then the second thing that completely shocked me was climate modeling is all physics. In fact, a lot of it was the exact same physics that I had already taken in astrophysics. So
wow.
I know. So here I am, accidentally, serendipitously, so to speak. Of course, there's no accidents where God's concerned, but I had all of the skills and ability and knowledge and tools you need to do this work. And it was this incredibly urgent issue, and it was affecting people. It's not just about the polar bears. It's about real people. I thought to myself, how can I not work on this?
Wow. Something just ignited in you, and you found yourself following the desire, the attraction. You were allured.
Well, I was very allured to astrophysics too. Let's not not go too far. But when I was 9 years old, we moved down to Colombia in South America. My parents were missionaries there for a number of years, and so I know what poverty looks like. I mean, I know what it feels like to live in a home that's made out of bamboo or cardboard boxes. I had friends who lived that way. I visited them. I stayed at their house. And so I know what that feels like. And so to understand that there's this global problem that is already impacting not just people in general, but poor people the most. And you happen to have the ability, the skills to work on that. It's like being an expert in tropical infectious diseases, and you actually happen to do like a thesis on Ebola, and then all of a sudden Ebola is like sweeping across Africa. It's like, how could you not help? You're just, it's not so much that you're enamored with helping. It's more like you're compelled. It's like a compulsion. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Hey, listen, real quick. My guess is, just because, I like to assume that I'm, a reasonably average person in most ways. I wasn't very familiar until I really started looking into your work and some other things. I'd heard about global warming. We know that, Al Gore did some presentation on it or something like that. Most people listening to this podcast probably have a very limited knowledge of what climate change actually is. I wonder if you could give us a quick overview on what you mean when you say climate change is an issue, and maybe touch on who's primarily responsible for that.
Absolutely. No, that's a good thing to do, because a lot of times we're like, okay, well, the ozone hole and air pollution and climate change, they're all kind of mixed up together. So here's the deal with climate change. Our planet has this amazing natural blanket in our atmosphere. This natural blanket is made up of heat-trapping gases like carbon dioxide and methane. So the sun shines down on the earth, and most of the sun's energy goes right through that natural blanket as if it were a window. It hits the earth heats up, and then the earth gives off heat energy. If we didn't have that natural blanket that traps the Earth's heat energy, just like a blanket traps our body heat on a warm night or on a cold night, if we didn't have that blanket, the Earth would be about 60 degrees Fahrenheit colder than it is right now. In other words, it would be a frozen ball of ice.
Wow.
But because we have that incredible blanket that's part of God's design for our planet, it traps the Earth's heat and it keeps us at just the right temperature for life. So that's a good thing, and that has nothing to do with us. That's all him, not us. So you might say, well, then what's the problem? The problem is that ever since the Industrial Revolution, we've been digging up massive amounts of coal and oil and natural gas and burning them. When we burn all of this stuff, it releases way more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere than was ever intended to be there. And so by burning all of this stuff, we are essentially wrapping an extra blanket around our planet, a blanket that the planet does not need. And that blanket is trapping too much heat. Now, the temperature of the planet has gone up, but that's not what most of us notice. What most of us notice is that our weather patterns are getting weird. So we're seeing crazy heavy rainfalls up in the Northeast. We're seeing incredibly strong heat waves all around the world that are killing hundreds and even thousands of people. We're seeing rising sea levels. We're seeing hurricanes that are turning like from a tropical storm into a Category 5 hurricane overnight because the oceans are warming. We're seeing all this crazy stuff around us and we're going, okay, something's different. What's going on? It's climate change.
Wow. And I think what's interesting is I think a lot of people, there's this misnomer that climate change is only simply global warming, right?
Right.
So, but there's also global cooling, as you mentioned, involved as well.
Well, global warming is what happens when you wrap this extra blanket around the planet. The planet's temperature goes up, but it goes up. It's gone up about 1.5 degrees in the last 100 years. And so people say, well, 1.5 degrees, that's not much. But what they have to realize is the average temperature of the whole planet, it's as stable as the human body. And if our temperature goes up 1.5 degrees, we get worried. We're running.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening to the planet. It's running a low-grade fever.
Interesting.
And it doesn't look like it's going to stabilize.
It will only stabilize if we stop producing all of this extra carbon dioxide. So that's why all of the countries in the world, 195 countries, went to Paris last December. And they went there because everybody is looking around where they live in their country and they're saying, whoa, there is something going on here and it is scary and it's even potentially dangerous. I mean, let's take Syria, for example. So Syria was already in a terrible situation. I mean, Syria had decades, even centuries of civil unrest, of corruption, of misallocation of resources, just of terrible situations. So Syria's in this awful situation because of historical and political reasons. And then along comes a killer drought, a drought that's gotten 3 times more frequent now than it would have been 100 years ago because of this extra blanket we're wrapping around the planet.
Wow.
That extra drought was part of what pushed Syria over the edge into the state it's in today.
Wow. Oh my gosh. So real quick, I'd just love you to clarify, just so people that are listening to this really, really get this. Who's primarily responsible for this?
Yeah, you're not going to let anybody off the hook, are you?
No, I really want us to hear it because I think that's the most important thing people can hear on this.
It is. So if we look at all of the carbon dioxide and all of the methane and all the heat trapping gases that we've been producing since the Industrial Revolution, and we add up which countries have produced the most, the United States has produced about 1/3 of the whole thing.
Wow.
And then the rest of the developed countries have produced most of it.
Man.
Half of the world, the poorest half of the world, has contributed 10% to the problem.
Whoa. Man.
Yeah. Now, people might say, hang on a second here, because I know that China's building a coal plant today, and when I go there, the air quality looks terrible, and it does. But what people don't realize is China is actually closing down their coal plants now. China has more wind and solar energy installed than every other country in the world put together. And
whoa.
I know, who knew that? Nobody knows.
You did. Yeah. You knew that.
So the solution is not to like turn off all our lights and, go off the grid and return to the Stone Age. The solution is to figure out different ways to get our energy. We can get it from the sun, we can get it from the wind, we can get it from the tides, we can get it from the earth. God's given us all kinds of ways to get energy that don't wrap this extra blanket around the planet and that don't produce air pollution, because when we burn coal and when we burn gas and oil, it produces all kinds of nasty pollutants that we breathe in that make us sick. In the United States, air pollution from burning fossil fuels, that's the coal and the gas and the oil, air pollution from burning fossil fuels alone kills about 200,000 people in the U.S. every year.
Wow.
I mean, can you imagine if terrorism killed 200,000 people in the U.S. every year? We'd be singing a very different tune.
We'd be a little upset about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Man.
We're in love with the oxygen, and we're never coming back again. Say goodbye to all our friends on the ground.
So, one of the things I think that's also important to bring up is obviously, as you mentioned before, specifically in the United States, it's become this very political topic.
Yeah.
Which is a very interesting thing.
So weird.
Adam and I have discussed this, outside of the podcast, and just why it became a political issue. And obviously, there are numerous different theories that we could get into. But
right.
But obviously, as we know, being Americans, the religious right politically has seemed to kind of grab hold of this topic and dispute it at all costs, and even so far as hiring their own scientists to come up with contradictory evidence. Anything from climate change models are not reliable. The Arctic ice is actually increasing, and all these sorts of things. So, as a respected scientist, what do you say in regards to kind of those studies that have been put out there?
Well, man, you covered a lot of ground in that one. Let me back up.
Yeah, just go wherever you want to with that.
Yeah.
Okay. So as my husband said one time, my husband, by the way, also being, the tent making kind of pastor that you are, he's a professor at the university, and then he also pastors a church. He said to me one time, he said, a thermometer isn't Democrat or Republican. So
wow,
the temperature is telling you is not going to be different depending on how you vote. But you are totally right. When we look at people in the United States today, the number one predictor of what our opinion about climate change will be. And again, climate change is a science. And science doesn't really care what our opinion is. I mean, you can say, I don't believe in gravity, but if you step off the cliff, it doesn't matter. You're going down, So
right.
Having an opinion on climate change doesn't really affect whether it's real or not. But
right.
The number one predictor of people's opinions in the United States about climate change is one single factor, and that is where we fall on the political spectrum. The further to the right we fall, the more likely we are to say it isn't true. Now, isn't that crazy? Because, like I just said, the thermometer is a thermometer. So why is it that people are so resistant to the science? I will tell you, in at least 9 cases out of 10, because I love talking to people and kind of trying to, pull away what I think of as the smoke screen and get to the real reasons. So if you sit down and you have a conversation, a real, genuine conversation with somebody who has objections to the science, who's pulling out these fake science studies and saying, but so-and-so said this and such said that. If you really sit down to them and you dig into the real issue that they have, the real problem that they have, 9 times out of 10, maybe even more, they don't actually have a problem with the science. They have a problem with the solutions, because the solutions to them imply big government, and they would rather cut off their arm than allow the government to do anything more than it already is. But it's a lot more palatable and a lot more socially acceptable to say, the science isn't real, or those scientists are just making it up, or they're just lining their pockets because they couldn't do anything else. It's a lot more politically and socially acceptable to say that than to say, sure, it's a real problem, but I don't want to do anything about it. And I will tell you something crazy. So we listen to all of our politicians and our thought leaders, and many of them, especially Republicans, are standing up saying, this isn't a real issue. Behind closed doors, almost every single one of them, not every single one, but almost every single one of them, will say, and I've heard them say it myself, and I have colleagues who've heard them say it in first person. They will say, sure, it's a real problem. It's an important problem. But I'm not going to say that in public because I can get reelected.
Right.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
don't get to be a politician by being dumb. These guys are super smart. But they know the side their bread is buttered on, and that is cold, and then it's callous, and that's very unchristian, in my opinion.
Oh, man. Yeah. Dude, I could not. So here, I just want to say, yeah, preach it, girl. Yep. Like, yeah, bring it. Yeah, so spot on. I mean, it's just calling everybody out on the lies that we want to believe. We all tell ourselves lies to keep our egos protected and keep our status quo right where it is. And let's just kind of cut to the chase here. Like, how bad could this get, and how soon?
Well, it's not too late. Let's start with the good news.
Okay.
It's not too late. For some people it is, and that's the sad thing. That's what really breaks my heart. I mean, in the United States, this year, we already have the first climate refugees. It is a native tribe down in Louisiana who's lived on a barrier island, and they have been flooded so frequently because not only is sea level rising there, but the ground is sinking because of all the oil and gas that's been taken out of the underground reservoirs.
Wow.
Whoa.
So they have had to abandon their land. And there are more towns up in Alaska, also Native Americans, who are going to have to abandon their land too, because what used to be permanently frozen ground up there in Alaska is now melting and crumbling and falling into the ocean, taking their homes and their buildings with it. So for some people, it is too late, but it's not too late for the majority of us. What do we have to do? We have to wean ourselves off these old, dirty ways of getting our energy. And more good news is the fact that we're already walking down that path. In fact, I would say we're already even sort of running down that path. I mean, here in Texas, on average, we already get like 10% of our energy from wind already. On a really windy day, we get up to 50% of our energy from wind. And this is Texas, okay? I mean, this is like the oil capital of America.
Yeah.
In Texas, Fort Hood, which is the biggest army base in the United States, Fort Hood just bought their new energy contract, and they made it all solar and wind because it was the cheapest way to go. They saved $165 million.
Wow.
So
man,
we're doing it. But the thing is if we had, all the wind and all the solar and all the amazing things that are happening right now here in Texas, here in the United States, over in China, if all of this were happening and it were like 30 years ago or 40 years ago, we'd be in a great spot. I'd be like, hey, we're going to be good. No problem. We're moving in the right direction at the right speed. But we've had 50 years. This is going to be crazy, okay? Last October was the 50th anniversary of the first time that U.S. scientists formally warned a president of the dangers of climate change.
Wow.
50 years.
Man.
So we have been sitting on our hands for 50 years, and that's why we have a problem right now, is because we haven't fixed it. It's as if you went to the doctor. Like, imagine you went to the doctor like 30 years ago, and the doctor's like, your lifestyle is not very healthy. Look at what you're eating. Look at how you're not exercising. You need to, pull up your socks. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble. And then you come back 30 years later, and you're like, doctor, I think I have some serious heart problems. And the doctor's like, duh. That's right.
Oh, yeah. As somebody that works very close to healthcare, that happens all day, every day.
Yeah, so it's things like that give me hope anyway. When I was reading up on some of the research out there and some of the responses to it, one of the things I read about that just blew me away. I'd never heard of such a thing, but it's this idea of the no regrets policy. This idea that it's too expensive to take on this problem and to come up with solutions, and it's too late. So let's just not do anything.
Oh gosh, that is like the lamest thing. That's kind of like in Thessalonians, where people are like, well, Christ is returning soon, so I'm just going to quit my job and sit around.
Right. Yeah, Paul laid that one out.
Yeah, he was very clear on what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to work with our hands and support our family and care for widows and orphans. And there's a lot for us to do. And so that, again, is a very unchristian attitude. Fatalism is not a Christian attitude. The idea of hope and love and the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, there's no despair, there's no hate, there's no ugliness, there's no fear in the fruit of the Spirit. That's not who we're called to be.
Oh, man, that is so good. That is strong. I love how practical and concrete that is. So much of the time when people talk about theology or they talk about scripture, it's these just, these ideas like predestination or rapture or, are you pre-trib or post-trib, millennial, blah, 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 blah. But like everything you're saying is so grounded here and now. And I'm just really enjoying this a lot. My question for you is Walt Brueggemann's got a phrase about how to define being a prophet. I don't know if you've ever heard this. Walt Brueggemann's a great commentator, thinker, theologian. He's just wonderful. I encourage you to check him out. But he talks about a prophet being somebody who speaks truth to power. Speaking truth to power. Now, it seems to me from what I've read about your career and what you do that you have a very unique mission, because it seems to me that you're speaking truth to power in two different directions. On one hand, you're speaking truth to power towards government. But on the other hand, you're speaking truth to power towards evangelicals who are having a lot of trouble getting on board with this, just statistically. And I know we've made strides, but statistically, do you see yourself as a prophet? And, if so, how do you go about maybe you've never looked at it that way, but I think you'll maybe pick up what I'm saying. How do you go about turning and facing the government and saying these things, and at the same time turning and facing a group like evangelicals who you yourself associate with? That seems like quite a daunting task.
It is. And I have to tell you, there's a lot of prayer that goes into it and that stands behind me. And I feel the power of that prayer every day.
That's great.
No, you hit the nail on the head. A number of years ago, I did this really fun thing called The Secret Life of Scientists. If you haven't seen it, you have to look it up. It's this little online PBS show where they find out the kind of these secrets that scientists have, and they show you, the secret life of what scientists do when they go home and they turn off the computer. So they were interviewing me, and they were, looking to see what my secret was. One person's secret was they were a juggler, and another person's secret was they used to be a beauty queen. And so my secret, I was like, okay, well, here's the types of things I do. And I was expecting them to say, wake surfing or something like that is your secret. And then when I started telling them about how I talk to people about climate change, they're like, we know what your secret is. You're a climate change evangelist. I had this immediate gut reaction thinking that is not it, because evangelism is preaching the good news, and I'm not preaching the good news. And so from that, I started to realize, okay, if I'm not preaching the good news, what am I doing? I'm the Jeremiah of today. I feel like one of those Old Testament prophets who just go on, and everybody's sick of listening to them. And they're just telling people all the bad things that are going to happen if they don't turn from their wicked ways. And they eventually die some sad and lonely death off in the middle of nowhere, but their names are remembered.
Absolutely. And you don't sound like the weeping prophet at all. So
optimism has to keep me going. That's the only way I can do this.
Oh, absolutely. So a little sub-question to the question I just asked you about speaking truth to power. And it seems like, obviously we know what side of the political realm is on board with this and which side is kind of having a little bit of trouble. Specific to evangelicals, I think a lot of people listening to this podcast right now either identify as evangelical or formally identify as evangelical or are heavily influenced by evangelicalism. Why are evangelicals having such a hard time getting on board with this? You'd mentioned it's politics, but it can't just be. Is it that simple? Like why are they having so much trouble?
Well, first of all, there's a strong age gradient. So the younger we are, the more likely we are to be just fine with the idea that climate's changing. And the older we are, the less likely we are. Also, again, it's really a U.S. thing. I mean, when I went to Paris, I went there and I met the head of the World Evangelical Association, the Secretary General of all evangelicals in the world, all 600 million of us. He is so committed to climate change that he was a member of the Philippine delegation.
Wow. Interesting.
I went to conferences and meetings in Paris with all kinds of evangelicals from Africa, from Europe, from Canada, from all over the world, even from the United States. So the whole evangelical climate change thing is quite unique. It's not entirely unique, but it's quite unique to the United States. And when you turn to the social science, and I love reading social science because that's the kind of the area of science that takes the top off our brain and looks inside and tries to figure out what the heck is going on inside our brains.
Absolutely.
So, when you turn to the social science, and one of my colleagues, a guy called John Evans from San Diego, he did this. He said, I'm going to look at evangelicals because I know that there's this huge bias where most, evangelicals will say this isn't a real thing. He said, obviously there's a correlation. So there's a correlation between saying it isn't true and being an evangelical. But what he said is there causation? So is being evangelical what makes you say it isn't true?
Interesting.
And he found that it is not. He found that, what we said before, the number one predictor of what we think about climate change is where we fall on the political spectrum. And that is modified by three things. It's modified, number one, by how old we are. Number one, by what gender we are. Men are more likely to say it isn't real than women. And very sadly, number three, it's modified by what race we are. And you see this when you look at Catholics. If you look at Catholics and you ask them, how concerned are you about climate change and do you think it's a real problem or not? Catholics are kind of, middle of the pack. But if you divide Catholics into Hispanic Catholics versus white Catholics, the white Catholics track exactly with white evangelicals.
I believe
and
it.
The Hispanic Catholics are the most concerned people in the entire United States about climate change. But you might say, well, they both got the same Pope. What's going on? It's not the Pope. It's not what we believe. It's the fact that if you look at the Tea Party in the United States, something like 40-something% of the Tea Party is evangelical. Yeah. Evangelicals have been hijacked by the political right.
Totally agree.
Yeah, our doctrinal statements have been somehow rewritten with hate the poor, leave the disenfranchised out of the country, marginalize anybody who doesn't look like us, and definitely don't love, because that would be weak. I mean, where is any of that written in the Bible?
Bring it.
Yep.
Get up. Get up sometimes, I get up sometimes, and then I go down sometimes, I go down sometimes again. I get up sometimes, I get up sometimes, and then I go down sometimes, I go down sometimes, I go down, I go down.
I think that's why so many people, why our podcast even exists, I think is because people are just fed up with the hypocrisy, the religiosity, the talking out of both sides of your mouth, saying that you care when you obviously don't. And it causes people to fracture, and it causes people to leave. And man, that's why we were so excited to get you on here. You act in so many ways as just such a bridge. And we need more of them. So if I could ask you a personal question, kind of getting a little bit away from getting into the weeds on the climate change and things like that, as interesting as it is, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about all this education that you've had. Obviously, you were raised in a Christian home. So it was a harmonious thing for you, science and religion, but out in the world, it's not. The general opinion, the general perception is that most scientists are materialists or don't have any religious faith. And here you are going through all this university training, all this academia, all this exploring the ends of the galaxies and black holes and climate change and all this kind of stuff. All of that learning a lot of times creates, fractures in worldviews, unlearning, seasons of doubt, struggling. Did any of that ever hit you? Did you have any seasons where you were just like not believing, but really kind of struggling to find a new footing, new language, new expression?
Whenever you're learning new stuff, you always run into those situations where you run into some piece of information that just does not fit within your preconceived view. And as a scientist, that's part of our training, whether we're Christians or not, is when we run into a new piece of information, not to reject it.
Wow.
But to turn it around, try to look at it from all sides, to try to figure out, is it real or is it not? And if it really is real, then we're forced to try to reconsider what we think might be true. So I'm really fortunate, I feel like, in that I've never run into anything that ever led me to question the existence of God. If I'm going to be totally honest and totally brutal, the only thing that's really led me to question the reality of God and God's presence in our lives is the hate I've gotten from other Christians.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes I just have to, cry out to God and say, God, if you're really there, how can you let your children act like this? Like, where is the lightning bolt from heaven? Where is the bear that ate the children that we're making fun of the life?
Seriously.
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that's caused me to pause and doubt God's goodness. But science has just been amazing. When you study the beginning of the universe, when you study the fact that every single thing that we see today, every piece of matter and energy came from one single point, that implies that point had to be created. Because cosmologists who aren't Christians, and there are many of them too, are tying themselves into knots trying to figure out what came before the beginning of the universe, because it so bluntly and so boldly implies a creator. So along that note, I can tell you exactly who you have to have on your program next. And that's one of my favorite people. Elaine Eklund. She's a Christian too. She is a sociologist, so she studies people. And way back when she was in Chicago, she was going to her Presbyterian church up in Wheaton. And, that time when they, you shake hands with the people around you. So she was just shaking hands and chatting with the lady in the pew in front of her. And somehow the conversation came around to science. The lady said to Elaine, she said, well, none of those scientists are Christians.
Ooh.
And Elaine thought to herself, we always hear that, but is that really true? So Elaine has dedicated her career, probably 15 years of it so far now, to surveying and talking with research scientists, kind of lay scientists like health professionals and engineers, documenting all of our attitudes and perceptions towards God and spirituality. And what Elaine has found is completely the opposite of what people believe to be true. But the majority of scientists do consider themselves to be spiritual people. They do believe in a higher power. Many more of us are Christians than you think, but a lot of us are not evangelical. And the reason why many scientists cite for the reason why they're not evangelical, the reason why they go to a mainline church, a Presbyterian or Anglican or Episcopal, the sad reason most scientists cite is the fact that they don't feel welcome in evangelical churches.
Whoa.
Oh my gosh. That is incredible, and you actually partly answered my next question. So thank you. What I was going to ask is obviously you kind of have this balancing act between being a scientist and being a person of faith, and you've kind of mentioned already that you've taken some criticism from the religious side. So I'm just curious, how has that affected you on your professional side? In the world of science.
Well, that's a good question. So my husband's a pastor, so I'm a pastor's wife too.
Oh, wow.
But when you're a scientist, a lot of us scientists are very, introverted. We don't, our chit chat around the water cooler, so to speak, is still about the science. Like that's what we actually enjoy talking about, So scientists don't really talk about their personal lives very much. So most of my colleagues, going back a few years, most of my colleagues had no idea, where I sat my bum on a Sunday, if I did, other than bed.
Sure.
And I didn't know what they did either. But what happened was when we moved to Texas and my husband started pastoring this church, he started getting all of these questions about climate change because the people in the church started to figure out who I was and what I did. And then, being very polite, they didn't want to just go up to the pastor's wife and being like, you're not even a Christian. What are you doing here in this church believing in Al Gore's religion? So they didn't want to do that. So they decided they would go to the pastor and ask him. So he started coming home with all these questions. And I was like, well, those are good questions. Let's find the answers. And so we'd, find some answers and he'd take them back and then more questions. And then people would be like, well, is there a resource that you can point us to? And at that time, this was probably about, almost 10 years ago. There wasn't really a great resource for people starting at the point where they were at. I mean, there's books written about Christianity and ecology and the environment and all that are great books. But if you think the whole thing's a hoax, you're not going to pick up one of those books.
Right.
So, talking it over, finally we're like, well, maybe we should write a book together about this. I'll write the science. And then my husband, he outlined the book because he's like, okay, here's the stuff we have to talk about. And then some of the times I was like, are you serious? We have to talk about that? And he's like, yes, we do have to talk about that because that's what people are asking. So writing this book, I have to confess, I was scared. And the number one thing I was scared of was that I was essentially coming out of the closet, not as a Christian, but as an evangelical to my colleagues. Yes. I was petrified that I was essentially going to be flushing my scientific career down the toilet.
Oh my gosh.
Interesting.
I bought the myth that Elaine is studying that scientists aren't Christians too.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Katharine, wow.
And so has that affected you once you kind of, as you say, came out as an evangelical? Did that have any negative effect on your career?
I can tell you what happened. Exactly what happened. So I didn't know how this was going to go down. So the book comes out and I keep on doing my thing. It's not like I walk around with posters of the book taped to my back or anything like that.
Right.
And I'm at my scientific meetings. I'm at my conferences. I'm, on my phone calls doing my research. And so I'm at a meeting, I'm at the coffee table, and one of my colleagues comes up, somebody who I've known, casually for a couple of years even, maybe even 10 years. They kind of sidle up to me sideways and they say, "We read your book at church." And I say, "Oh, you go to church?" And they say, "Yes, that was a great book. It was perfect."
Whoa, that's awesome.
I know. And then I'll be on a phone call with somebody who wants the climate data I provide. And so we go through this whole, phone call talking about the data. And then rather than saying goodbye, there's this pause. And then they're like, "So I heard you wrote this book." And I'm like, "Yeah, you want a copy?"
Oh, you're giving people permission.
So I have a list now of colleagues in my field. I don't even know how long the list is. I'm feeling like I should make like a website of us all with pictures and what church we go to and what we do.
Yes.
There are scientists who are very senior scientists, like the guy who heads the paleoclimate program. Paleoclimate is the study of ancient climates. So it uses data going back hundreds, thousands, even millions of years to study what climate used to look like in the past. That dude is a Christian. Who knew that?
Wow.
Nobody knew that until he pulled me aside and had lunch with me at a conference, and that's what he wanted to tell me. So I just had these amazing conversations. And sure, I've gotten some nasty notes, and sure, I've gotten a few people saying things behind my back. But if I had to guess the ratio of colleagues who have been incredibly supportive and encouraging, even when they come up to me, for example, and they say, "I don't believe what you believe, but I support what you're doing." So I would say it's about 1,000 to 1.
Wow. That's incredible.
That is so incredible.
Before we, as we're winding down here, before we get into the last couple questions that we have for you, to kind of circle back around again, what can people do? What can the average person do to help kind of contribute to fixing the problem of climate change?
Yeah.
Ooh, I have the perfect answer.
We thought you might. We really did. We thought you might.
Yes. So the problem we always have, each of us, is we're like, well, this is this huge global problem. And I'm one person. And I'm sitting there, in Ohio or West Texas or wherever I am. What can I do? I change a light bulb. Who cares?
Right.
So that's why I am so excited about this awesome organization called Climate Caretakers. They have a website and a Facebook page. They were invented by this awesome guy called Brian Webb, who works at Houghton College in upstate New York, a little Wesleyan college there. And what Climate Caretakers is it is an online community of Christians who are committed to working together to do what we can on climate change. So every month, Climate Caretakers sends you an email. And they say, okay, our action this month is X. And if this many of us do it, this is going to be the cumulative result of our actions. So, little things add up. Like if each house in the U.S., so not each person, but if just each house replaced one light bulb with a new LED that you can get, at Walmart for $3 now, that would be like taking almost 1 million cars off the road in terms of all the extra carbon dioxide we'd save.
What?
Oh my gosh.
I know. It's crazy. Just silly things like turning off our computers at night, eating red meat 1 day less a week, writing a letter to our elected officials. Every time you write a letter, they think a letter counts for depending on your district, between 100 to 1,000 people. Write them a letter saying, hey, this is who I am. This is what I appreciate about you. And this is what I care about. Please consider climate change when you vote.
Wow.
So Climate Caretakers helps us. So that is the number one thing people can do is go to Climate Caretakers, sign up, and you will get all the ideas, all the support, and all the community that we need to make a difference. Because as Christians, we're built to work in community. That's who we are. We need to be in community. And today, thanks to the internet, we can have this amazing community of Christians who are worried about climate and who want to fix it.
Man, that's awesome. It's just a shame that the evangelicals are bringing up the rear on this, but you're working hard to change that, and that is awesome.
Hey, Climate Caretakers isn't bringing up the rear either. I feel like, if you look at the whole population in the United States, maybe so, but evangelicals who get it, like the National Association of Evangelicals gets it. They are leading on this, and the World Association is certainly leading on this. And, people like Climate Caretakers and amazing evangelicals around the country, they are leading on this. So we have evangelicals out at the forefront, and we have evangelicals dragging their tails at the rear. And what I would love is for us all to just take another look at the Bible. Like, don't take anybody's word for it. Just Read the Bible, get into the Word, and pray and prayerfully consider, what should my attitudes and actions be towards others who are not as fortunate as I am?
Man, if we could all just do that, I don't think anybody would have a problem with Christians if that's really what we were known for.
Exactly.
Yeah, and that's definitely what Jesus was all about. Well, one of the questions we love to end on that we've been talking around sort of this whole episode, so I'm excited to just kind of put it to you bluntly. It's something we end basically every guest on, and you've got a particular skill set and a particular perspective that'll make it a unique answer. What would you like to say to two different sides? You know, we always picture there's two different sides listening to this podcast. There's the sort of fundamentalist that's maybe waking up to the fact that life's a little bit more complex and there's a whole lot more. And then we've got the more materialist side that's spiritually curious. So if both of those sides are listening to this right now, speak to those Christians who kind of put their head in the sand and sort of deny science, and then speak to the materialists who kind of put their heads in the sand and deny a lot of evidence for the divine.
Sure. Well, for the first group, and really to any of us who are Christians, I would go to my favorite verse, which is in 2 Timothy, and that is the verse that talks about how God has not given us a spirit of fear. God has given us a spirit of power, a spirit of love, and a sound mind. What would it look like if we let go of our fears? Because at the very bottom of it, just about all of this resistance is fear, whether it's fear of loss of control, whether it's fear of not having things the way I wanted them to be, whether it's the fear of the unknown or the unfamiliar, whether it's fear of government or the United Nations. If we're going to be honest with ourselves, it is fear at the bottom. And if it is fear, that fear is not from God. If we believe in a sovereign God, what do we have to fear? We believe this life is temporary. We believe that we're put here to love others. So let's start acting like who we are and let the chips fall where they may. That's what I would say.
Man, that's good.
And what about to those who maybe look at science and kind of hide behind it and say, so, well, science, makes it very clear that the divine it's not possible. It's not there. That doesn't exist.
Yeah. So I would say for those is that science is not a religion. Now, I know that some have made it into a religion, but at its core, at its essence, using the Google definition, science is the same definition that we get from the Bible. So in Hebrews 11, there's a definition of faith, and in that chapter, there's actually, I believe, the anti-definition of science. Faith is the evidence of what we do not see. Science is the evidence of what we do see. And Google gives us those same definitions. Faith is based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof, and science is based on a study of the natural world through experimentation and observation. They are not two opposite systems of belief, and they're not in competition with each other. When it comes to the issue of climate change, science can tell us a lot. Science can tell us that climate is changing. There's not just thermometer records and satellite records. There's 26,500 indicators in God's creation: rising sea level, melting glaciers, birds moving north, peach trees flowering earlier in the backyard. There's thousands of lines of evidence that climate is changing. We've been studying why it's changing for 200 years. And we know that if it were natural cycles, we'd be getting cooler right now, and we're not. We're warming. And then science can also tell us, if we continue on our current pathway, what our future will look like. But if we choose a different pathway, a safer and more secure and smarter pathway, then science can also tell us what that will look like. But science can't tell us what to do. Science is like a compass. It can tell us which way is north and south and east and west, but which way is the right way to go, that doesn't come from our heads. That comes from our hearts. And that's what our faith gives us. And the Christian faith gives us that heart compass to tell us the right way to go, the right direction to move in is away from fear and towards love.
Beautiful.
Well, I don't think we could end on any better note. So before we let you go,
Drop the mic.
Yeah, exactly. You can drop the virtual mic. Tell people where can they go to find your book. You mentioned that you've got this book out, A Climate for Change: Global Warming Facts for Faith-Based Decisions. Where can people go to find that book? And also, what's the best way for people to stay on top of what you're currently up to?
Thank you for asking. That's an awesome question. So I am on Facebook. It's just my name, Katharine Hayhoe, with 2 A's. And I'm on Twitter, too. I have a website, which is just my name again, Katharine Hayhoe, where I have a lot of the videos I've done. We have videos from the 700 Club, from 100 Huntley Street in Canada, from all kinds of different things. And my husband and I are just working on the 2nd edition of our book. So if you go to Amazon, it's, there's some old copies there for astronomical prices. Please do not buy those. Just wait another couple of months. This summer, our plan is to have the book out, and we're excited about that. You can find it on Amazon and hopefully in some bookstores too.
Oh, man, that is wonderful. This time with you has just been so life-giving. Your energy, your positivity. I wonder if you would also be an Enneagram 7. I don't know if you've ever done the Enneagram, but you are just a blast. You're so optimistic and enthusiastic, and it's infectious. So I hope that came through. I'm sure it did for our listeners, and I hope that we can do this again down the road. There's always more to talk about. There's always more perspective to open people's eyes to, and you have a gift in doing that, and we appreciate you immensely.
Well, same to you. Thank you so much. This is very fun.
All right, Katharine. Well, again, thank you, and we'll look forward to doing it again sometime.
Sounds good.
What do you do with the broken heart? Where do you go when it all falls apart? World upside down, you don't know where you are.
Adam? That was everything that I hoped it would be and more.
It's so much to say.
I know, and people are always like, are you ever going to have a guest on that doesn't blow your mind? And I say, no.
Why would we do that? If we did, we wouldn't air it.
Right, because it would be boring and no one would want to hear it. And so people don't know, and this is something we've mentioned before, but people have no idea what work we're doing behind the scenes in regards to, what guests we're getting and
how to curate these releases.
Yeah, like when we put them out, and obviously, we've taken some of the feedback, we're trying to get more female voices and people of different backgrounds, and we're definitely feverishly working on that. But one of the guests that I would say that we've been trying to get for a long time has been, first of all, a science expert, a scientist of some kind on the show.
Yeah.
And we got not only a scientist, but a female voice all wrapped into one, and
a powerhouse and a sweetheart.
Yeah.
I mean, so nice. Just so bubbly and fun, and breaking all of those normal stereotypes that you would think of scientists, that you would think of that community, that you would think of Christian, that you would think of she was iconoclastic.
Yeah. Whoa.
Paradigm busting.
Yeah, and if I could drop a little hint, she will not be the last scientist we have on this summer.
We may have made some connections.
Yeah. Well, even beyond that, we've got a couple already on the calendar. So.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I love our job.
We're going to be
quote unquote our job.
We're going to be dipping into some different fields within science. We've got more musicians coming up, and we've also got some other unique kind of one-off episodes that I'm really excited about.
It's going to be a fun summer.
Dude, you guys are going to love it.
And fall. And just wait until October.
Oh, man.
Oh, they don't even know what's coming in October.
I got the graphic done for that, right?
We will never release that picture.
No.
So this episode, though, I really felt like we were truly speaking to somebody who is a prophet. To use that Brueggemann phrase again, speaking truth to power.
Yeah.
Power runs the world. And, to to borrow the Al Gore now famous PowerPoint presentation name, the inconvenient truth, right?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of what she's saying is not getting traction in America. And she was almost more cutting about what she said about like America and even what she said about evangelical Christians and their reticence and reluctance to come on board. She's like, this is just an American problem, guys. And you know why? Honestly, if I'm going to read between the lines, we love driving our Escalades.
Yeah.
And we love eating what we want when we... I mean, we are drunk on freedom at the expense of others and at the expense of the world.
Yeah.
And that's just the bottom line.
Dude, I've been screaming for a high-speed train forever.
I would love that. I really would. We could podcast on the train.
I know.
That would be amazing.
From here to Chicago in like 3 hours. That would be great.
Get a list of people and just get them on the train.
Yeah.
We can have a train.
150 miles an hour?
Have a train podcast.
Oh, the first of its kind.
But man, her answers were informed and fair and fun and easy to understand. And I hope that those of you that are listening to this right now, I hope that, goodness, man, I hope something changes in you. I hope that whatever the case may be, that you don't walk away from an episode like this. A lot of our episodes, hopefully every episode we do changes you in some way. You can implement some kind of a change. Maybe it's get into a community. Maybe it's, forgive somebody. Maybe it's forgive yourself. Maybe it's read somebody new for the first time. This is one where you could actually start to change the physical, actual world.
Yeah. And I think my mindset has always been, I really enjoyed this episode for this reason, because it kind of confirms some things that I've been thinking over the years in regards to climate change. And that is, number one, that, scientists are just there to do their jobs, right? So they're just there to do the science, to crunch the data, to see where the numbers lead them, and to follow, the results, right? And so we need to stop politicizing that. It's not a political issue. It's a science issue. It's a humanity issue, number one. And the second thing I always think is, hey, like if there's even a fraction of a chance this could be true, why would we not take action?
Seriously, man,
to prevent that from happening? If there's even a chance,
yes.
I'm a parent now, and I'm a lot more conscious of like the world I'm going to leave my daughter, and. I don't want to be a despicable human being and absolutely just wreck this place before I hand it over to her.
No, I'm with you, man. I like the way you said that. If there's even a chance, like let's wake up and realize that we are here. This is a gift. No matter where you think it came from, it doesn't matter. If you're breathing in and out, if you have breath in your lungs, if you have volition and will and ability and agency in this world, that is a massive responsibility. And you need to do something with it that's not selfish and start to change some things. I don't like to give personal anecdotes, but my wife and I have made several changes this year. Not massive ones, small ones. Like she said, we replaced, and we got the LED bulbs this year. I changed my consuming habits this year because I realized that the fashion industry is one of the greatest contributors to pollution and social injustice, child slavery, and things like that. These issues are all tied together. They are ethical issues, and do something different, guys. Do something different. So, man, I'm amped.
That was so good.
I have to go to bed now, but I'm so amped. Oh,
I don't.
So good.
No.
Definitely going to be having her back. Definitely going to be having her back. Well, if you guys enjoyed this, first thing that we would ask you to do is continue to help support John and I in our our lack of income in doing this podcast. If you're connecting with this at all, there's a link in the show notes. You can click it. It takes you to a little Squarespace store. Modest donations, $5, $10, $25. We are going to be setting up a Patreon for some other projects that you'll be hearing more and more about as the summer unfolds. Like us on Twitter. Follow us on Twitter, share us on Twitter.
Yeah.
Get this out there, guys. The more people that we change the world, the more we all hear new perspectives and learn how to do this without being angry, but being open-minded, graceful, humble. We can struggle, we can doubt, we can wrestle together.
Yeah. I mean, follow us on all the social media. We like to put up daily quotes, inspirational quotes on Instagram. You can follow us on Facebook. Go to our website, thedeconstructionist.com. And follow us there. And for those of you that came out to Pete Ron's event in Grand Rapids this last, I guess it'll be a couple weeks ago now when this goes up. But thank you guys for coming out. It was really cool to see the support for Peter Ron's in Grand Rapids, and even cooler for us to meet some of you guys who follow our show. So
what a blast. We love each and every one of you so much. We count this as just a tremendous gift that we get to do this. Keep encouraging us. We love it so much, but we'll take all the encouragement we can get, however that looks for you. So with that, hope you enjoyed the episode. Give Katharine a shout out on social media, buy her book, visit her website, get going on that. You can find all that stuff in the show notes and more. With that, we are your hosts. I am Adam Narlock.
And I'm John Williamson.
Keep deconstructing, everyone.
Confined by my own design, defined by things I could not change. But how can you be so unhappy out among the stars? Home is where your treasure is, no matter where you are. We're enough with the oxygen, and we're never coming back again. Say goodbye to all our friends on the ground. I dreamed so hard there, I dreamed so hard I lost my mind. Turning minors into majors, distorting my perspective over time. But how can you be so unhappy out among the stars? Home is where your treasure is, no matter where you are. We're enough with the oxygen, and we're never coming back. Say goodbye to all our friends on the ground. Say goodbye to all our friends on the ground.